Today we're going to be testing two cameras. We've got the Canon R6 and the Fuji XH2s. Now at the moment this main angle is the Canon, but in a minute I'm going to switch these two over so you can take a look at these in both situations and get a more direct comparison between the two lenses. On this camera we're shooting with the RF 50mm 1.2. It's about as good as a normal lens gets for the Canon system, and it costs around about £2,400 retail in the UK. On this camera we've got the Fuji 33mm 1.4 LM. This is the newest 50mm equivalent lens for the Fujifilm system, and we can again compare the two. Now if you're not certain, the side camera angle is a much harder scene for a camera to capture. I've intentionally included the majority of this window and I've left the blinds open, whereas this angle is much easier to capture. So the reason we've done this is to test the dynamic range between both cameras. Now there are some differences. The Canon has a lower base ISO of 800 when shooting in C-Log3, which we are here, and the Fujifilm has a base ISO of 1250. So we've got the shutter speed a little bit higher on this camera to compensate, but otherwise both of these frames should look the same. They're both on their wide automatic focus settings, so we can find out which one is preferable. The Canon has autofocus turned on, the Fuji doesn't. That's the only difference between these two cameras right now. So with that said, we're now going to switch the cameras and you can take a look at each shot from the other angle. Okay, and we're back. So all I've done here is switch the camera angle. So now we've got the Canon R6 here with the 50mm 1.2 RF and the Fujifilm here again with the 33. It is worth mentioning the Fujifilm is shooting in f/log2, which apparently has a greater dynamic range, and I'm starting to wonder if you can see it in the shot. Also, basically everybody complains about the autofocus in the Fujifilm. So again, you can tell me whether you think this is better or worse or basically the same. Again, the log profiles are pretty different. The Fujifilm should have more dynamic range, the Canon should have slightly less. In terms of the industry, apparently the Canon has one of the worst dynamic ranges, and I'm not sure you can even see it. So again, feel free to take a look at both frames and decide which you like the best. Both of these cameras are oversampling from a 6K-ish image. And in the case of the Fujifilm, we're recording in something called open gate right now, which means it's recording the full sensor. So it's 2:3 rather than 16:9. So if you look at this now, you should see the whole frame without the black bars, whereas the Canon can only record in 16:9. This is the widest aspect ratio. You might be asking why I'm doing this test. And the main reason is this. I recently had an issue with the Canon R6 where I was getting some terrible fixed pattern noise in a situation of shooting quite a lot. Canon told me that this was expected for this camera, and I kind of got sick of dealing with issues. So we're trying to find out whether I can get a similar result from another brand at a similar price point and kind of go from there. If the Fujifilm's more reliable, has better dynamic range, better autofocus, for me at least, it makes sense to add this to my kit, either alongside the Canons or instead of the Canons. So we're going to do a little bit of testing to find out what we think of these two images. And as I said, initially we had the Fujifilm on this angle and the Canon on this angle, but now we're looking at the XH2s with the 33 and we're looking at the Canon R6 with the 50mm 1.2. The setup on the Canon is around about £1,500 to £2,000 more expensive than the Fujifilm, and the Canon R6 does overheat. In the last 2 years, I've only had it overheat on a job once, and even then it was right at the end of the job and it wasn't a major issue. However, it is something you're conscious of at all times when you're shooting with the Canon system. So if you're looking at the two and you need something to run long form for interviews, the Canon might not be the easiest option, although it does have a stunning image. So as I said, I have no idea which of these two is better. This is literally the first time I've hit record on the Fuji, and I've used the Canon for ages, and I love the image from the R6, so much so I actually prefer it over the Canon R5, the Canon R5C, and basically any Sony camera. So whatever you think of the Canon footage, just bear in mind that that is my preference. This is the look that I love out of any camera. So if the Fuji looks better to your eyes, it's better than what I consider to be the best. So again, take your time, make your own decisions. I'm going to take a look at the footage and I'll make a decision from there as to whether I prefer the Canon or the Fujifilm. So I've just finished color grading the footage. And after a while looking through, the first thing I wanted to say was I really like the way that the Fuji renders those skin tones. There's something about how warm and luminous everything is. Now the Canon had its own strengths. It has more contrast and it has a little bit more crispness, a bit more sharpness. And another thing I'd noticed that with the Fujifilm not having the eye detection active, when I gestured, very often it would track my hands and not stick to my eye the way I'd prefer for a talking head situation like this. So what we're doing right now is testing that out. The Fujifilm is on this angle here, and it has eye detection on. So we'll now see whether or not me gesturing like this has any impact on the way that it focuses. Now in front we've got the Canon, and on this one, again, we've still got eye detection on. And one thing I did notice in the other test was that the Canon hunted a lot more than the Fuji. On this side angle, the Fuji kind of kept focus on my face unless I had physically moved my hand in front of my face on that side angle. Whereas the Canon kind of jumped around a little bit more, sometimes lost my face for absolutely no reason. And that is a little bit upsetting because people tend to say that Canon has the best autofocus out of the two systems. And I think right now that's not the case. Now, this test that I'm doing right now is going to be crucial because it will show whether or not the issue is that face detection algorithm setting things off. So you've been watching the footage. The angle over here is the Fuji and the angle here is the Canon, which has been more reliable. Now, as with the previous test, I'm going to quickly go through. We're going to switch these cameras over to see whether the Fuji performs better when facing directly at me. So we're back, and now we're looking at the Fujifilm and the Canon. So how did the Fujifilm perform in the last test? Did me having my hands in the frame cause any issues? Did that focus jump? I guess we'll find out in the edit, but I'm hoping that it's pretty reliable because if it is, it's a bit of a no-brainer. It means that the Fujifilm is more than enough for me to use as my primary video body. Now, that is saying a lot. Because again, until recently, nobody even thought of Fujifilm for video. But this camera really is changing that. I can honestly and truly say I prefer the image that I've seen so far over the R6, which up until now was my favourite image from any camera that I'd shot with. I've tried the R5C, and although the image was lovely, the battery life was shocking. I got 6 minutes out of one full charge in terms of footage, and that's just not acceptable. What the Fujifilm offers here is nice image quality, maybe not quite to the level of the R5C, but it also gives you 2.5 hours of battery life, super reliable autofocus with face detection, more dynamic range than even the R5C. And I think that's pretty difficult to argue with. So the real question is now, how does it perform for stills? I'm going to take a look at that over the next few weeks, and we're going to see how these two systems stack up. But right now, it's looking like Fuji's going to replace Canon as my primary video system. I really wasn't expecting that.